and welcome back to ChessLecture.com. My name is Dana Mackenzie, and today we're going to do what we do once a month, which is look at a listener-submitted game, Learn from Your Fellow Amateurs, Part 7. And I'm calling this lecture Desperados Galore because there's just a really, the finish to this game is just absolutely fabulous, and I think you'll find it. I hope you'll find it as much fun as I did. So now, before I get started, let me mention that I did not get very many submissions this month, and so I want to really encourage all of you to send in your games for this feature. I can't do it without listener-submitted games, and so actually what I've done this month is go back to an old game that was submitted several months ago, and as I've said before, if you submit a game once, it'll stay submitted, and I'll go back and perhaps lecture on some of the old ones as well. And this is a wonderful game. I came very close to selecting it the first time, and so I'm glad to finally give it a chance to be the featured game for the month. So this is a game between Chess Lecture subscriber Sebastian Fernandez, who is playing white, and he was about 1790 player at the time this game was played, and his opponent David Schell was about 1830. So very close match rating-wise, and this is from the Florida State Championship in 2006, the under 2000 section. And so let's get right to it. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the opening because the really fun action is in the middle game here. So we'll go fairly quickly through the first few moves. Starts with e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, nice open Sicilian here, pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, knight f6, knight c3, and a6. So here we have the Najdorf variation. And Sebastian plays bishop to e3, which is the English variation, very popular. In fact, we had this variation in one of the other Learn from Your Fellow Amateurs games a couple months ago. And that game continued e5 here, but in this game, Black played e6, which is basically the other main variation. So let's take a look at it. White's plan actually here is quite similar to the other game. So he plays f3, and his idea is going to be to play g4, h4, launch a kingside pawn storm. He's going to play queen to d2 and castle queenside. So a very common plan for white in the Sicilian defense. Black plays b5, also the main line. Queen to d2, knight b to d7, g4, getting the pawn storm underway. This was not essential yet. White could play other moves, but this is certainly consistent with his plan. Knight to b6, and now White plays queen to f2, and so this is an interesting move where White is trying to take advantage of the g1 to a7 diagonal. So he's now threatening to go knight takes e6, which would discover an attack on the knight at b6 and would thereby win material. So Black needs to defend that knight, and he plays knight on b to d7. White continues castles in line with his plan, and Black plays queen to c7. Incidentally, let me point out here that you might be tempted to play b4, kicking White's knight, but if Black did that, then White would have a nice response with knight to c6, forking the queen on d8 and the pawn on b4. So obviously Black doesn't want to allow that, and so he plays queen to c7 first. White continues with h4, getting those pawns rolling, and now Black is ready to chase the knight with b4. And this chases the knight back to a very uncomfortable square, knight to b1. So not only is the knight badly placed here, but also it's in the way of the king. So when White castles kingside like this in the Sicilian, or in other openings too. Very often white would like to play king to b1 to get his king off of this open file, and also possibly play rook to c1 after that to support the c-pawn if necessary. But by putting the knight on b1, white's king is really now stuck on the c file, which is a very dangerous place for it. So, so in my opinion, white should, strive as quickly as possible to get his knight off of b1 and back into the game, both for the sake of the knight and also for the sake of the king. So black continues bishop to b7, natural move, and here white makes, I believe, his first mistake of the game, which is rook to h2. Now, I'm actually fond of this sort of move myself. I like what I call horizontal defense. So the rook on the second rank is defending the pawn on c2 and overprotecting that pawn so that white will not fall victim to any surprise combinations. But actually, white didn't really need to do this yet, and I think that, so as I was sort of implying with my previous comments, now is really the time to play knight to d2 and get this knight back into the game. So if black continues rook to c8, white can now play knight to b3, and the c-pawn is perfectly well defended. The knight is possibly going to come to a5, and I think this is an okay position for white. But instead, what we're going to see is that white is too slow about bringing his knight back into the game, and this leads to real congestion on the queen side for him. Another unfortunate aspect about this move, rook to h2, which maybe was hard to anticipate here, but turns out to be very important, is that the rook itself is quite vulnerable on that square. So when you take a look at the b8 to h2 diagonal, black's queen is already on that diagonal, and if the d-pawn moves to d5, then black is going to be attacking that rook, and it's going to be something that white has to worry about, as we're going to see. So for those two reasons, both the vulnerability of the rook on h2 and the fact that white really needed to activate his knight, I think rook to h2 was a mistake, and we're going to see that white gets into trouble in the next few moves. So black continues with rook to c8. Now, of course, it's too late for white to play knight to d2 because black would play e5, threatening, trying to drive the knight away from d4. And of course, if the knight moves from d4, then black will play queen takes c2 checkmate. So, of course, white can't let that happen, so he would just have to give up a piece. So, therefore, white cannot activate his knight, and instead he plays queen to d2, and so we see white's sort of doesn't have a good plan in mind. He's going back and forth with his queen. He's now taken all the squares away from his knight. He's taken all the squares away from his king. So he's really got a tangled up mess here on the queen side. And black continues very naturally with knight to c4. This forces an exchange of bishop for knight. So white goes bishop takes knight, queen takes bishop. Black's now attacking a2, so white plays knight to b3 to defend that threat. Also notice that white is now threatening knight to a5, which would fork black's queen and the bishop on b7. So here black plays kind of a nice move, I think, to prevent that. He goes back to c7, queen to c7. Offering to let white take the pawn on b4. And somewhat to my surprise, Sebastian actually did take that pawn. Looks like a very dangerous move because this allows black to play d5, which is something you rarely see on the chessboard. It's a double discovery, double discovered attack. Not only does it discover an attack with the bishop on f8, attacking white's queen on b4, it also discovers attack with black's queen on c7, attacking the rook on h2. So fortunately, white, I'm sure white saw this, had to see this coming, and white does have a way of defending, which is to drop the queen back to d2. But as a result, black now wins back his pawn very easily with pawn takes pawn, and bishop takes e4. So clearly, I think black has a distinct advantage here. He's got lots of pressure on white's pawn on c2. And again, let me emphasize once again this tangled up situation of white with the knight on b1, the king that's stuck on c1 and can't go anywhere, and the extreme danger on the c file. So all of those things give black a definite advantage. So for example, if white wanted to, say, go queen to a5, trying to trade queens, then he would actually lose immediately with queen takes pawn check. And rook takes queen, rook takes rook checkmate. So definitely, white has to be careful here, and he can't just play around. So now here, if I think white definitely makes his second mistake of the game. He plays the move queen to f2 here, and I think that a better move, and certainly the move that white should have looked at first in this position, is knight to c3, because this starts taking care of some of these problems that white was having. It brings the knight back out into the game, and it blocks some of the pressure along the c file. So this is a move that white would definitely like to make. Now I think that maybe white was scared off because the move bishop to b4 looks strong in response. But actually white now would have a very nice answer to this, a nice tactical solution to his positional problems, which is queen takes knight check. So a sort of desperado check with the queen. And the point here is that after queen takes queen, rook takes queen, if black takes the rook, then the bishop on e4 is now hanging. And so white ends up winning 2 pieces for rook and has a great advantage. So this hanging bishop on e4 is the point. So black has got to play bishop takes knight. But now white has a choice of 2 possibilities, both of which I think would equalize. First of all, he could just simply play pawn takes bishop, and after king takes rook, knight to c5 check. So once again, a nice tactical point, again taking advantage of that unprotected bishop on e4. Unprotected pieces are very often candidates for being forked, or sort of running into unpleasantries of various kinds. So black would have to go rook takes knight here. White would go bishop takes rook, and in this position, black is definitely a little better, say, after rook to c8, because white's pawns are a little bit messed up. But we do have bishops as opposite colors, and so I think white would have fairly good drawing chances, although he's got some work to do. Alternatively, if white doesn't like that line, another possibility for him in this position would be simply to move the rook away with rook to a7. And now white has a double attack on the bishop on c3 and the pawn on a6. So black's only move is bishop e5 in order to counterattack, so hitting the rook on h2. Then white would play rook to d2. And in this position, I'll stop here. I think that it's a very dynamic position with chances for both sides, but I don't think white stands any worse here. Black's 2 bishops are of course very impressive, but white's pieces are pretty good too. He has 2 rooks that are threatening to double themselves on the 7th rank, which is pretty dangerous. In addition, the rest of white's pieces are well placed. The knight on b3 can come to c5. Also, black has a weak pawn on a6. So for all these reasons, I think that white actually is doing fairly well here. So going back, my main point here was that so knight c3 is the first move that white should have been looking at, bishop to b4 is the most obvious sort of objection that black might raise this move, but white tactically is able to equalize after that move. So in fact, a better try for black would have been bishop to f3, which forks the rook on d1 and the pawn on g4. But again, I don't think white should be too afraid of this. He can just play rook to e1, and if black takes the pawn, then white can play bishop to f4, and white has a lot of open lines. He's got pressure on the e file. He can bring his rook over to the f file. His knights can start wiggling into the position. He can play knight to d5, depending on where black's queen goes. White could also maybe play knight to a5, or maybe knight to d4. So a lot of possibilities for white's pieces. So, yes, white has sacked a pawn, but I think he has some reasonable play for it. And this is certainly better than what white played in the game. Sometimes if you've got an inferior position, a good way to start making it playable again is to give up a pawn and create some tactical counterplay. So anyway, so here we are, bishop takes pawn, and so instead of knight to c3, white plays queen to f2, and this move has an immediate tactical refutation. So if you want, you can hit pause and see if you can find black's move here, which gives him a serious advantage. Black plays bishop to d6. And so here we can also see another reason why queen f2 was wrong was that white was very happy with his rook and queen doubled on the d file. That put pressure on that d file and prevented bishop d6. But now white's released that pressure, and so black is able to play this move, bishop d6. And it's possible that white overlooked something here. He may have thought, oh, I can just play rook to h3. But then we would once again get this mating combination with queen takes pawn check, followed by queen takes queen and rook takes queen checkmate. So once again, white really regrets the fact that he's, sort of wedged his king in so that it has no escape squares. So after bishop d6, white had no option. He had to give up the exchange with rook takes bishop, queen takes rook. Okay, so obviously so far things have not gone very well for our chess lecture subscriber. But here he does something, very good, which is, when you lose material, sometimes there's a temptation to say, oh, well, I've lost this game, and just kind of mail the rest of it in. But you've got to, you've got to resist that, and you've got to realize that your opponent, if you've messed up, chances are at some point your opponent's going to mess up too, and he's going to give you counter chances. So keep on fighting, even if you've lost some material. So Sebastian said this very nicely. He said, at this point I took a breather and decided that I need to find some initiative quickly, so I tried to complicate the position as much as I could. And in fact, he did succeed in creating quite a bit of counterplay, with a little help from his opponent. So let's see what he did. First he does knight c3, good move, getting that knight out, finally. Should have done it earlier, but okay. It's good to do it now. Black played bishop to d5. And we're going to see over the next few moves is a real battle for the initiative between these two players. White now plays queen to d2. So pinning the bishop on d5, and this pin is going to be uncomfortable for black, and in fact the pressure on d5 is going to be an ongoing theme in this game that we're going to see. So for now, black castles, also good, reasonable move. You got to do that. Finish your development, get your king to safety. And white plays h5, again, logical move. So he wants to generate counterplay by attacking on the king side. Now here we get an interesting point in the game where black plays rook to d8, which is a reasonable looking move, but the computer suggests, and I would also suggest, another very thematic move for black. And this is a move that black should certainly have looked at. And of course, we don't know, I don't know whether he looked at it or not, but the move that black certainly should have considered here is rook takes c3. So I'm sure many of you have seen this type of sacrifice before in the Sicilian. Very thematic sacrifice. It breaks up white's queen side, exposing the king to attack. And it also removes one of white's most active pieces and really gives black complete control over the center of the board. So notice tactically the point here is that white cannot go queen takes rook because he would hang the rook on h2. And so once again we see this theme that the rook on h2 was kind of badly placed because it was vulnerable to black's pieces. So white would have to take with the pawn. And now black has a couple good options. One very strong move is knight to e5, threatening knight f3, threatening knight takes g4, threatening knight c4. Lots of powerful threats with this knight. Now, one problem with this move is it allows bishop to c5, and so things get pretty double-edged here. Even so, the computer says black has a very substantial advantage here, but black doesn't actually have to take that chance. He could also play simply rook to c8 here, preventing bishop to c4, c5, and then threatening knight to e5 next move. And all of black's pieces are just really, really well posted here. White's king is in danger from queen to a3 check. The pawn could go to a5 and then to a4, hitting the knight on b3. There are just lots and lots of plans for black, I'm sorry. And the computer evaluates this as being close to a 2.5 to 3 pawn advantage for black. Of course, you can't get into the habit of using the computer as a crutch. And this is definitely, evaluating that sacrifice is really, it's the sort of thing that separates the men from the boys and the masters from the amateurs. I think that a grandmaster might well have, Topolov or somebody like that, I think would probably not have hesitated to play something like rook takes c3. But the psychology, I think, begins working on black here. And, he's won the exchange. And so psychologically, it's difficult to give the exchange back. There's a tendency to say, okay, I'm up the exchange. The game ought to just win itself. And so I'm just going to play kind of safe, solid moves. And I'm not going to really think about a move like rook takes c3. But I think there's a lesson here, which is that the game doesn't end when you win material. It doesn't end when you lose material. So, white really was up to the challenge in this game. He continued playing even though he'd lost material. But black kind of gets a little bit lazy here and, doesn't keep on pressing for the best moves and instead plays moves that are just kind of okay. So anyway, having said that, rook d8 is not a blunder, but it does miss an opportunity for black. And okay, here Sebastian plays h6, very nice move. So now he's really now he's made contact with black's king side. And so white's attack is really coming before black's. White is succeeding in taking the initiative, and that's what chess is all about. Now black plays g6, also a little bit of a lazy move. Black could have played something like knight f6 or knight to e5, sort of making a double-edged position and fighting for the initiative. But by playing g6, now he's really weakened his position. Look at these dark squares on the king side, and there's no dark-squared bishop that black can defend him with. So black is really creating some positional liabilities. And also, notice that this also takes any of the exchange sack ideas with rook takes c3. It takes away that possibility, because now rook takes c3 is going to be answered by queen takes c3, which threatens checkmate on g7. And so, so we've now got little checkmate possibilities in the air for white. If he can get his queen to g7, game's over. So by playing this move, g6, black has now created the possibility of actually losing. So Black's still in great shape, still should be doing fine, but this move creates weaknesses, and that's something that masters really avoid like the plague.
This is Grandmaster Damian Lemos here for OnlineChessLessons.net. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, the 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from OnlineChessLessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damian for OnlineChessLessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.